So anxiety is associated with the future, depression is associated with the past, and peace is associated with the present. Go ahead and read chapter 12 in The Art of War, Sun Tzu, the attack by fire, and then relate it to anxiety. Sun Tzu said there are 5 ways of attacking with fire. The first is to burn soldiers in their camp. The second is to burn stores. The third is to burn baggage trains. The fourth is to burn arsenals and magazines. The fifth is to hurl dropping fire amongst the enemy. Number 2, in order to carry out an attack, we must have means available. The material for raising fire should always be kept in readiness. Number 3, there is a proper season for making attacks with fire and special days for starting a conflagration. Fire is, we're going to use that as anxiety here. So your fire, your inner fire is your anxiety. 4, the proper season is when the weather is very dry. The special days are those when the moon is in the constellations of the sieve, the wall, the wing, or the crossbar. For these 4 are all days of rising wind. And number 5, in attacking with fire, one should be prepared to meet the 5 possible developments. And then it goes on to tell you the 5. I'm not going to go into those. But that is just the first page of chapter 12. Okay, how is this related to anxiety? Well, this chapter, the attack by fire, is about using fire as a method of attack, a dangerous, potent weapon that can either win a war or backfire if it's not handled with wisdom. Okay, it's about controlling destructive force, timing, and managing chaos to your advantage, which you can do especially in a state of anxiety. Now, this is the thing. Anxiety is something that manifests itself because of fear of the future, or you don't know what's going to happen, or of the unknown. This is how I look at life. And by the way, if this is helping you, you like these stuff, I am offering more like one-on-one work if you want like someone to talk to, or you want somebody to kind of help you process what it is that you're feeling. I have some clarity calls and then some like texting support. It's clarity calls and texting support. You can check those out in the link below. Sun Tzu's framework. Fire is powerful but unstable, right? Fire is, when it gets in the woods, it just spreads tremendously. Okay, it's very powerful. And just like anxiety, fire, and it's kind of like anxiety. Okay, if you don't control your anxiety, it can kill you. Okay, it's an energy. It's a heat that spreads, and it spreads fast. And if you use it carelessly, it can burn everything down, kind of like fire. So in Sun Tzu, he teaches that move not unless you see an advantage. Use not your troops unless there is something to be gained, and fight not unless the position is critical. So if you translate that to anxiety, basically what it's saying is don't engage your fire, meaning your anxiety, unless it serves a purpose. So I talk about in some of my earlier videos that whatever you feed grows. Okay, whatever you feed grows. So if you are feeding your depressive thoughts, that will grow. If you are feeding your happy thoughts, that will grow. If you feed your anxiety, that will grow. This is why when you're in a stressful situation, the last thing you want to tell yourself is, let's say you're a crier, right? The last thing you want to tell yourself is, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. Because what happens when you tell yourself you're not going to cry? You end up crying. What you want to tell yourself is, I'm calm. I'm calm. I'm calm. I'm calm. No different than pumping your muscles, right? You want to grow your biceps, you focus on training your biceps 4 days a week, and you put yourself through a surplus so that you can grow your biceps, right? So I've gone through a season where I was focused on my hamstrings. I've been going through several months of focusing on growing my hamstrings. So I've been doing a lot of hamstring curls, and a lot of RDLs. That's the goal right now, is to focus on my hamstrings. You know, in the season before this, I was focused a lot more on back and chest. Okay, but you know, you don't want to focus on it too much because you also don't want it to be overdeveloped, right? So I want my chest and my back and my legs to be proportionate to one another, unless you want to be wellness competitor and you want huge legs and look like a T-Rex, but I digress. 5 keys from the chapter 12 apply to anxiety. Number 1 is fire must be controlled and not suppressed. So when you're feeling anxious, don't suppress your anxiety. Okay, you don't want to necessarily suppress your anxiety. You just want to mold it properly. You want to shift the energy away towards anxiety and put that energy into something else. It's no different than, let's say you're training for a sport. Anyone that wants to be good at something, like, typically have a chip on their shoulder. People don't necessarily talk about this, but it is true to some point. I mean, if you want to be good at and excel, you have to have this kind of thing in your mind where it's not good enough, because that will keep pushing you to keep getting at the best that you can be. I say that in that that's what kind of in a way drives you. So in the same way of like anxiety, that's driving this anxiety, right? What's the root of the anxiety? Because if you can get to the root and to the core, that's what will really help you heal it, or at least overcome it. Okay, because when it comes to like feelings and emotions and going through things, there's always a root to that. So if you have a lot of anxiety, then maybe perhaps look at your childhood and figure out, maybe you were really anxious when you were a kid because you were abandoned, or maybe you were abused, or maybe you were mistreated, you were misunderstood, or you feel maybe you weren't necessarily abandoned, but you felt abandoned, right? You perceived it as abandonment. And so then you start associating like somebody leaving you with anxiety, right? Because that's how you used to feel when your parents used to leave you with the babysitter or something, or your friend left you to go be with those people over there, right? And so those little perks of anxiety start to manifest at a very young age. And so now that you're an adult, those feelings start to come back because you recognize those patterns, right? So understanding the root, looking at your childhood, not necessarily to fix it, but just to understand yourself. So fire must be controlled, not suppressed. So when you start a fire, be prepared to respond, is what Sun Tzu is saying. So anxiety is not a weakness. You can use it to your advantage. Okay, you can use anxiety to be really good in business, right? You can be using anxiety to be really good in sales because you're so you're highly kind of neurotic. When you're highly anxious, you just always feel like you're never enough. Or you can use it in fitness, right? There's a lot of people in fitness that are really highly, very anxious, and they pour that energy into the workouts, okay? So anxiety is not your weakness. It's an energy, and it can be your strength if you know how to control it. But you must contain it and redirect it, because if you don't, then the anxiety will consume you. Number 2, use fire only when the conditions are right. So fire must be used with care and only with full understanding of the terrain. So anxiety often comes when we're unsure of our internal terrain, meaning our thoughts, our fears, our identity. Okay, people experience anxiety because we feel threatened, or we don't know. It's kind of fear of the unknown, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. In order to master the anxiety, you must understand your triggers, your patterns, and your mental environment. So in other words, know your terrain before you act. So if you know you're going to be in a situation where it's a very anxious environment, you need to do your part and mentally prepare yourself and know what's going to trigger you. If you know that if they say something that's going to trigger you, then mentally prepare yourself to be nonchalant, right? To be calm and cool. And this is not to say that you don't care. Being nonchalant is not necessarily that you don't care. It's more so not giving it meaning. You're not giving it a positive or negative meaning. You're just neutral. Okay? You take a pause. They say something that offends you. They say something that's rude or that brings you down. Don't give it your energy and time of day. Just pause and look at it in a way that let it bounce off of you. Okay, so there's a quote by, I think it's Osha: no one can offend me without my permission. So no one can offend you without your permission, and anything that somebody says or triggers onto you, you have the power to bounce it off from you, that they gave to you, or not gave, but said to you. This comes to you, but you can bounce it off by staying neutral. Whereas if you react or react versus responding, right? If you react instead of respond, then you are actually feeding their ego. You're feeding, you're giving them what they're looking for. They're trying to get a reaction out of you. So let it bounce off of you versus let it consume you. Okay, number 3, fire can signal opportunity or collapse. So when fire breaks out inside the enemy's camp, respond immediately from without. When anxiety arises, don't ignore it. Okay, respond strategically. Okay, like I mentioned a couple seconds ago, let it bounce off of you. Have some strategy behind your response or your reaction towards like a stressful situation. Okay, number 4, wind fuels fire and fire turns against you without strategy. Okay, let me read that again. Wind fuels fire and fire turns against you without strategy. So in other words, don't try to solve your anxiety during chaos. When you're under chaos or like in a heated situation or an argument, the last thing you're going to want to do is try to solve the problem or the anxiety in chaos. That's the last place that you want to. What you actually want to do is recalibrate and control it, but don't necessarily try to solve it. So don't engage in spirals when you are already exhausted and overstimulated, okay? Because that's going to heighten your anxiety. So wait until you are calm enough, like wait until your nervous system is calm to think clearly. Okay, so you have to let that anxiety subside. Now, if anxiety rises in a stressful situation, like in a conversation, take 10 seconds to breathe, take a step back and just breathe and calm yourself down. And sometimes you may even have to leave the conversation. However, that's not always available. And mentally remove yourself from the situation and learn to detach from the situation. Because this is the thing. Whoever cares less wins. Whoever cares less wins. So whoever cares less, if you care, typically you're gonna feel anxious because you're emotionally invested. Okay, so control that anxiety, control your emotional investment by learning how to detach. And number 5, the wise commander does not fight fire with fire. You cannot fight fire with fire. Just like how you have person A and person B, both are fire personalities. They're gonna clash. There's always gonna be some sort of clash. They will not get along. Now, if they both have self-awareness and they both respect one another, that possibly could work. Like typically you won't see like an alpha, quote unquote alpha woman with like an alpha man. Typically you don't, usually very rarely do you see that. Typically there's some sort of balance in the power dynamics. And if there isn't, eventually it's going to lead to some power struggle. You don't want to fight fire with fire. You don't want to fight your anxiety with more anxiety. Okay, what you want to do is water down the fire, aka the anxiety. Okay, and let the water, aka your mind, be the general of your mind. Okay, you want a sergeant that's controlling your mind. Okay, and you have anxiety. That's part of this little section of the brain. Okay, the sergeant is trying to tell your mind in general, hey, calm down. Calm down. You can't control the future, right? You cannot control your future. You can't control what's going on out here, but you can control what's going on up here. But in order to control that, you need to learn how to talk to yourself and soothe yourself during these times. And again, whatever you feed grows. So if you keep feeding your anxiety, it's only going to keep growing, okay? So don't fight that fire with more fire. Fight it with some water. Tell yourself, I'm beautiful. I'm smart. Maybe put your mind on your dog. Maybe put your mind on your grandma. Think about the flowers that you saw this morning. Think about that delicious meal that you had for lunch, right? Look at the good and focus on that. Now you may be saying, oh, that's easier said than done, Yelena. Of course it's easier said than done. No one says it's going to be easy. It's simple. It's not easy. Okay? Because once you master this, you can master anything. Nothing will faze you. Okay? But you have to work through it. Not necessarily ignore it. The skillful warrior masters fire not by avoiding it, but by knowing when to use it. So again, you can use anxiety, you can use anger, frustration, your advantage. It's just knowing how to use them. Okay, learn to master it. Let it become your fuel. Okay, let it be the reason as to why you do something, not the reason that you don't do something.